You won't believe what they found in Rob Reiner's house. Rob Reiner has been known for many years as a quiet mastermind behind American stories. A director whose films changed the way people thought about love, friendship, justice, and humor for generations. His life looked like it was planned out from the outside. Every part can be seen through famous films and public convictions. But after the camera stopped rolling and the applause died down, people's attention turned to what was around him when no one was looking. What was outside the sets, the scripts, and the public record. As news about his estate spread, people didn't respond in a loud or dramatic way. It made me think. The finding didn't go against what people thought they knew about the man. It made him stronger. Patterns, goals, and emotional consistency that were laid out so clearly were things that few people expected to find. It wasn't about money or attention. Intention was at the heart of it, and how a life spent making stories softly made its own ending. The story of Rob Reiner looks very different now that you know what was found. Early in his life, Rob Reiner wasn't in the public eye. It happened in places where talking was important, where humor had meaning, and where sharing stories was both an art and a duty. Before people knew his name, before cameras followed him around, and before companies asked him what he thought, he was taking in the rhythms of a world that was shaped by performance, discipline, and close observation. Rob Reiner was born in New York City in 1947. He grew up in a family where acting wasn't a hobby but a job. Carl Reiner, his father, was already making a name for himself as a writer, actor, and comic. A man whose job required accuracy and knowledge rather than a lot of work. There was creativity, but it wasn't a waste of time. In the Reiner home, telling stories had a reason. Jokes were structured. Ideas needed to be made clear. People knew that humor could bring out the truth in music, not take away from it. Rob paid close attention as a child. He learned how to use timing, why sound was just as important as quiet, and how to make characters that showed society without preaching. He watched as his father worked in a field that valued content over popularity. There wasn't a need to show off. There was wait time. Craft came first. The family setting pushed people to be curious instead of competitive. Rob wasn't forced to become famous. He was given the chance to gain perspective. He paid more attention than he spoke. He watched how adults talked to each other, how disagreements turned into creative arguments, and how respect was gained by being consistent instead of paying attention. These lessons would shape how he led and told stories in the future. That base was strengthened by education. Rob went to Beverly Hills High School, where being close to famous people and having high goals was typical. But he stayed grounded even there. Fame was clear, but not something to strive for. The focus stayed on getting to know people instead of trying to get noticed. He continued his education at the University of California, Los Angeles, after high school. There, his interest in acting grew, but it never went away. It wasn't just the goal to act. The interest was related to a larger interest in how people talk, feel, and act. Restraint was what made these early years stand out. Rob Reiner didn't try to separate himself from his childhood, but he also didn't depend on it. Having access was a privilege for him, but he also knew its boundaries. Chance didn't mean anything without planning. Without control, exposure didn't mean much. It took him a long time to learn that earned influence stayed longer than attention. This time in his life changed the way he saw the world. He paid more attention to details. He valued working together. He thought the people in the crowd were smart. He thought that stories should have real emotional stakes, and not just be big shows. That thought did not come from an idea. It came from seeing honest and patient pros do their jobs. Under the surface, there was also a growing emotional understanding. Rob became aware of how fragile success is because he grew up near it. Jobs went up and down. The public changed its mind. Values, ties, and hard work that didn't give up were what lasted. That knowledge made me more humble. It also made people more independent. He wanted to make a contribution on his own terms, based on principle instead of what other people expected of him. When Rob Reiner became an adult, he was already ready in ways that didn't stand out. The tools were already there, but he hadn't made his mark yet. He saw stories as a way to reflect, not shout at people. He thought that being a leader meant listening. He knew that content, not speed, was what made people live longer. From these early roots would grow everything that came after. From a youth colored by thoughtful art. From a schooling based on observation. From a young man who slowly but surely learned that the best way to have an impact is to do it before anyone else does. Rob Reiner didn't burst into the public eye or make a lot of noise when he did. It came about through hard work, smart decisions, and being ready to take on a job that was both risky and rewarding. By the early 1970s, the planning he had done in his younger years was starting to pay off. This put him at the center of American television at a time when the medium was changing. Rob Reiner was cast as Michael Stivic on the important show All in the Family in 1971. The part would shape his early career, but it also required a level of emotional intelligence that wasn't often asked of young players on TV at the time. Michael Stivic spoke his mind, cared about politics, and often found himself in direct conflict with Archie Bunker, the main character of the show. Comfort wasn't thought into when the relationship was made. It was meant to show how tense things are in a country that is split. Reiner saw his job as more than just a job. It taught me something. All in the Family was more than just a show. It was a cultural mirror that dealt with race, politics, class, and conflicts between generations in a way that was more honest than anything else on TV. Working for Norman Lear, the show's author, Reiner was surrounded by experienced actors and writers who saw comedy as a way to get to the truth, not as a way to escape it. Each script was important. Each show was important. There was instant and huge success with the show. All in the Family quickly became one of the most watched shows in the U.S., changing what people thought a comedy show should be like. The role Reiner played, Michael Stivic, put him in the public eye. People knew who he was. Critics paid attention. People all over the country looked forward to seeing his face. Even so, his fame didn't change how he did things. Reiner stayed focused on the work itself even as his fame grew. That's right. He watched how scenes were put together. He saw how to deal with stress without losing the humor. He learned how to use conversation that made people think without turning them off. These lessons were more than just about acting. They quietly got him ready for something bigger. He learned how to keep going by being an All in the Family. The show ran from 1971 to 1979, for 8 years. During that time, Reiner had to deal with the demands of long-term success, the monotony of production plans, and the stress of staying relevant. It taught him how the public could make an actress seem like a certain person, and it made him aware of how acting alone might limit his ability to be creative. By the late 1970s, it was clear that he was interested in more than just acting. Reiner was still dedicated to his job, but he started to want to shape events instead of just living in them. His knowledge of narrative control had grown since he worked on a show that valued perspective and substance. It was clear to him that the people behind the camera often had the most power. When All in the Family ended, Reiner had to make a choice that many artists do when they have a lot of early success. He could keep looking for jobs like these, or he could change his direction. Redirecting was his choice. The choice was not made quickly. It was planned and based on years of observing and thinking about things. He stopped acting not because he didn't want to be successful. It was a change in aim. The attention he got from everyone in his family gave him respect, but it didn't tell you what his goals were. It was important to him that the stories he told had the same clarity and emotional honesty that had shaped his childhood and early work. It was during this time in Rob Reiner's life that visibility met purpose. His first big part made him famous, but more importantly, it helped people understand him. He began to understand how stories could change culture, how leadership worked in creative places, and how tone, timing, and point of view affected public discourse. When I became aware of that, my imagination changed. He began to imagine a time when his voice would not only be used in shows, but also in stories. It was more of a turning point in terms of direction than fame. The base had been set, the lessons had been learned, and the road ahead slowly became something that would change everything. Rob Reiner's time on All in the Family was like a quiet school, where he learned how to make a lot of different things. When he took on the part of Michael Stivic in 1971, he experienced a TV world that was unlike anything else showing. The show was aggressive, had many layers, and wasn't afraid to make people feel bad. Through characters who felt too real, it forced viewers to deal with race, politics, gender roles, and generational strife week after week. There was more to Reiner than just acting in that world. He was taking it all in. He was in the middle of a masterclass in restraint and accuracy, while working with Carol O'Connor and Gene Stapleton. It was never a mistake for All in the Family to be funny. Each pause was important. Every line meant more than just making you laugh. Reiner watched how Norman Lear used speech to break the ice without preaching. How scenes were put together to show character rather than settle a dispute. He learned that truth could be told through humor in a soft or sharp way without losing its humanity. It was planned for Michael Stivic to be the opposite of Archie Bunker. He was a voice of reason that often clashed with stubborn custom. It took patience and mental control to play that part. Reiner learned how to show conviction without making fun of people, and how to let tension build up instead of rushing to find an answer. He remembered those lessons long after the cameras stopped rolling. He used that sense of balance to help him understand how to tell stories. Reiner watched how creative power worked from the inside. He saw Norman Lear help writers question what they thought they knew and protect the work's purity. He understood that leadership wasn't about being strong, but about being clear. People had their say, decisions were made, and the goal was important. That place put a seed there. It didn't feel like acting was the end goal anymore. It began to feel like getting ready. During the 1970s, as the series went on, Reiner became more aware of the power of people who shaped stories instead of acting them out. He watched how episodes were put together, how the tone changed from funny to serious, and how tough topics were presented without turning people off. The show never changed what it was trying to say, but it also never stopped reaching people. He was interested in that balance. Reiner had worked on one of TV's most important shows for almost 10 years by the time All in the Family ended in 1979. He left with a lot more than just praise. He left with discipline, a new viewpoint, and a sense of what work that matters could look like. He could speak now that he was acting. He knew what to do because he had observed in the years that followed, that change could be seen. Reiner's lessons from All in the Family came up quietly, but regularly, when he started to direct and produce films. His pictures were warm without being overly sentimental. Instead of teaching, they respected the crowds. Characters could be complicated. There was both humor and sensitivity. He was still influenced by his TV years when he worked on This Is Spinal Tap in 1984, Stand By Me in 1986, and The Princess Bride in 1987. Each project showed that the authors knew that stories will last longer if they were honest, and let the viewers decide how they felt instead of telling them. Reiner's art showed a deep respect for the irony in people, a willingness to let happiness and sadness live together without trying to explain them. That sense of right and wrong did not happen by chance. It grew slowly, episode by episode, in a living room where fights weren't about furniture or dinner tables, but about who you are and where you fit. Working on All in the Family taught him that he didn't have to be loud to have an effect. Care had to be taken. It needed to be heard. And having the guts to let events stand on their own after they were out there in the world. Those skills helped him become a successful producer and director, and they continued to do so long after the crowd had stopped cheering. From that time, not only did a great artist come out, but also a storyteller who knew how to take responsibility. Reiner kept alive the idea that entertainment could make people feel good, make them think, and bring them together without losing its soul. And his belief would shape the reputation he kept building long after he stopped acting and his voice took over the mic. It became clearer over the course of Rob Reiner's work that his legacy would be shaped by consistency rather than spectacle. He didn't follow the crowd. To stay seen, he didn't turn around. Instead, he kept picking stories that showed a strong belief in character, clarity, and emotional truth. As his body of work grew over decades, the pattern became clear. People in his works trusted him. They had faith in memory. They believed that people were smart and aware, and that they didn't need to be rushed or overstimulated to feel deeply. Titles that became cultural touchstones are often used to measure Reiner's impact. Stand By Me honestly showed what it was like to be a kid, refusing to let memories make the pain go away. It let fear, friendship, and loss all exist at the same time. Honoring the way memories work in real life, The Princess Bride showed wonder without being ironic, romance without being embarrassing, and humor without being mean. It stood the test of time because it never talked down to its readers. It let them come in. When Harry Met Sally, she handled adult relationships with care and restraint, letting silence and doubt have as much weight as words. A theme stayed the same across fields. Reiner focused on people, not ideas. His personalities were not made to make a point. They were left to fall, change, and not be solved. That way of doing things showed what he learned early on. The idea that stories should show what life is like instead of telling it. He did not make feeling easier to understand by making it simpler. He appreciated how complicated it was. Reiner's effect went beyond films and into the larger cultural conversation. He became a strong supporter of public involvement in government and spoke out about democracy, responsibility, and participation. His participation in public debate reflected the ideas that ran through his art. Talking was important. Listening was important. In order to make progress, noise had to be turned off. He went into these talks with the same calmness that made his stories stand out, based on belief instead of results. Mentorship was another thing that he left behind that will last. People who wrote, directed, or acted with him often talked about how trust made the work setting what it was. Working together was promoted. Curiosity was kept safe. People took the work seriously, but never at the cost of their honor. Reiner knew that places where people feel safe enough to share their best ideas without worrying about being snubbed are places where creativity thrives. His personality moved farther away from the spotlight over the years. Still, his impact was still felt. Films he made decades ago kept getting seen by new people, were passed down through families, and were watched again at different points in life. They were still useful no matter what time it was. They were important because they talked about things that didn't change over time. People of all ages knew what it was like to have friends, love, fear, growth, and strength. Reiner's impact is also based on moderation. He knew how to back off. He didn't keep trying to repeat his past successes. He let his work stand on its own without constantly improving it. That faith showed that they knew more about endurance. Important stories don't need to be told over and over again. They always find their way in silence. No amount of volume or power can describe Rob Reiner's legacy. It makes sense. Lifelong decisions that are in line with beliefs that were learned as a child and are carefully passed on. He made a body of work that people could trust, that respected people, and that gave people room to think. By doing this, he made sure that his impact would last long after the projects themselves were forgotten. Once people looked at what he had already built instead of what he was going to build next, the base was already strong. It wasn't clear what his impact was. It was something that lived. Rob Reiner's sad death on December 14, 2025, stopped the world in a way that not many events do. People of all ages who had grown up with his work heard the news. From early films that became classics to projects that changed the way Americans thought about humor, connection, and morality, the news wasn't a dramatic story in the sense of a show. A quiet moment of thought for everyone, looking outward at the life of a man who had an impact on many people beyond the camera. Hugs and prayers came from all over the entertainment business, from longtime friends and creative partners to actors whose careers he helped shape, and from people whose lives were changed by his stories. People like Billy Crystal, Albert Brooks, and Larry David spoke out, not just out of shock, but also out of deep thanks for a life that was full of wonder, humor, and a strong desire to tell the truth. They didn't talk about loss as something that was over, but as something that would live on in memory and meaning. Over the next few days, people's attention slowly moved from the news to the life that had led up to it. Not where the story finished, but how it had been written for decades made people curious. Through serious and funny moments, through going over and thinking about things, and through characters that felt like they were real because they were drawn with empathy and intelligence. It became clear that Reiner's body of work was more than just a list of titles. It turned into a tapestry with ideas that kept coming up. Honesty with characters and respect for viewers. An idea that telling stories can heal as well as entertain. Once generational films became cross-generational when kids and grandparents watched them together in the living room, connecting decades of change with a shared emotional language. His impact didn't go away even when he wasn't there. Younger directors were able to learn from conversations about his work. People read tributes as if they were writings in style and purpose. Reminds us that legacy is not about fame or output amount, but about how well intentions stay the same over time. Reiner was clever in more ways than just directing movies. It lived in the people he worked with, the voices he emphasized, and the stories he picked out that put kindness ahead of ease of use. There was noise in the space he left behind. It spoke through those constants, laughter that still makes people feel soft, and quiet parts of films that make people remember who they were when they first saw them. People didn't think of his wealth in terms of things or deals when they started to think about what it meant. They thought about how to contribute and how to connect. They saw a way of life that wasn't set up for show, but for survival. It wasn't a bunch of prizes that he left behind. It was a body of work that made people think long after the titles were over. In this way, his legacy lives on through people who watch his films again and again, artists who use his style as inspiration, and talks that still center on the decisions he made to tell stories. What's left is not shock. It makes sense. A purposeful life, a voice that will be heard, and a kindness that will be felt for a long time. Rob Reiner's story doesn't end in sadness. It starts to make sense. A life shaped by purpose, interest, and care doesn't go away when it ends in tragedy. It goes on through echoes, remembered laughs, scenes played over and over, and lessons quietly passed on. Reiner never worked to make noise. He built a sound. Instead of telling people what to do, he allowed them to feel it. He also believed that stories had weight even when they weren't flashy. What he leaves behind is more than just praise and awards. It lives on in the way humor softened harsh facts, in the way relationships were shown with care, and in the hope that stories could still be kind. We should remember that legacy is not about how loudly a life is lived, but about how deeply it links. Things will keep getting faster. Even though generations come and go, the impact stays the same. That's how you know your life has been fully made and given. Check out this for more sad stories.